The wrench slipped from my hands and clattered against the basement floor as her voice drifted down from upstairs. "I don't miss my ex," she said, her words carrying a weight that made me pause mid-repair. "But I miss being held." Those 8 words would change everything between us, though neither of us knew it yet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow.
For you.
My name is Levi, and I've been fixing things for people in Cedar Falls, Iowa for the better part of 15 years. Started right out of high school when my dad's back gave out, and someone had to take over Morrison & Son repairs. The son part stuck, even after the old man passed, mainly because changing signs costs money I didn't have. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in February, the kind of day where the cold seeps through your bones and makes you question why anyone chooses to live in the Midwest. The voice on the other end was soft but determined. "Hi, I'm calling about my heater. It's making this awful grinding noise, and honestly, it's barely putting out any heat. My neighbor Mrs. Chen gave me your number. What's your address?" I asked, already reaching for my coat. Mrs. Chen was good people, and anyone she recommended usually was 1247 Maple Street. It's the blue house with the white shutters. I'm Emma, by the way. Emma Walsh. I knew the house. Victorian, a place that had seen better decades, with a kind of character that real estate agents love to call charming when they mean needs work. I'd driven past it countless times, always noting the overgrown hedges in the front porch. That sagged just enough to suggest the foundation had some opinions about gravity. 20 minutes later, I was standing on that same porch, toolbox in hand, watching a woman about my age fumble with 3 different locks before the door finally swung open. Emma Walsh had auburn hair that caught the pale winter light and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore an oversized sweater that looked like it had been through several winters itself, and thick wool socks with a hole near the left big toe. "Thank God you're here," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I've been wearing every piece of clothing I own for the past 3 days." The house was indeed cold, cold enough that I could see my breath in the hallway. But it was also beautiful in that particular way old houses can be when someone actually cares about them. The hardwood floors were worn but clean, the walls painted in soft colors that made the rooms feel larger than they were. Books everywhere, stacked on tables, filling built-in shelves, creating small towers near the couch where someone had clearly been reading multiple volumes at once. "The heater's in the basement," Emma said, leading me toward a door near the kitchen. "Fair warning, it sounds like it's dying." She wasn't wrong. The ancient furnace wheezed and groaned like an old man trying to get out of bed on a cold morning. I'd seen plenty of units like this one installed, sometime in the 1980s, and held together by determination and prayer. The heat exchanger was cracked, the blower motor was shot, and the whole system needed replacing about 5 years ago. "How long has it been making this noise?" I asked, kneeling beside the unit and opening my toolbox. "About a week, maybe longer." I kept thinking it would sort itself out. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, bouncing slightly on her toes to stay warm. "I'm not great with mechanical things. My ex-husband always handled stuff like this." The words hung in the air for a moment. I caught something in her voice. Not sadness exactly, but a kind of resigned frustration. "Well, let's see what we're dealing with," I said, focusing on the task at hand. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is fix what's broken without making them explain how it got that way. The next hour passed in relative quiet, broken only by the occasional clank of tools and Emma's footsteps upstairs. She'd check on me every 15 minutes or so, always with a cup of coffee in her hands and a question about whether I needed anything. The coffee smelled good, real good, and after the 3rd offer, I accepted a cup. "You take it black?" she asked, and when I nodded, she smiled.
Good.
I never trust people who need to dress up their coffee. It was a good coffee, the kind you get from a local roastery rather than a grocery store shelf. We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, steam rising from our mugs, while the dying furnace continued its mechanical death rattle behind us. "So what's the verdict, Doc?" Emma asked eventually. I set down my coffee and rubbed my hands together, trying to figure out how to deliver bad news gently. "Well, the good news is, I can get it running for now. The bad news is, This whole system needs to be replaced. I can patch it up, maybe get you through the rest of winter. But come spring, you're going to want to start thinking about a new unit. Emma's shoulders sagged slightly. How much are we talking? For a full replacement, probably 8 to 10,000, depending on what you want. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the furnace like it had personally betrayed her. $8,000 I don't have for a house I'm not sure I want to keep? There was something in the way she said it that made me look up from my tools. Emma was staring at the basement walls, but her eyes had the distant look of someone seeing something else entirely. You thinking about selling? I think about a lot of things these days. She turned back toward the stairs. I'll let you work. Holler if you need anything. I spent the next 2 hours nursing the old furnace back to something resembling functionality. Replaced a few worn belts, cleaned the burners, and performed what my dad used to call mechanical CPR, the kind of repairs that buy you time rather than solve the real problem. By the time I was done, the house was starting to warm up, and the grinding noise had settled into a more manageable wheeze. Emma was in the kitchen when I came upstairs, standing at the sink and looking out the window at her backyard. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across what had probably once been a beautiful garden, but now looked like a battlefield between human intention and natural entropy. All set, I said, wiping my hands on a rag. Should keep you warm for the rest of the winter, but like I said, I know. New system by spring. She turned from the window, and I noticed she'd changed into a different sweater. Oh, this one deep blue and considerably less oversized. What do I owe you? 200 should cover it? She nodded and disappeared into another room, returning with cash. As she handed it to me, our fingers brushed for just a second, and I noticed her hands were soft but cold. Thank you, Levi, really. I know it's not a permanent fix, but right now, permanent feels like more than I can handle. I was packing up my tools when she said it, almost as if she were talking to herself rather than to me. I don't miss my ex. I really don't. We were wrong. For each other in about every way, two people can be wrong. But I miss being held. Does that make sense? The wrench I'd been holding slipped from my hands and clattered against the floor. When I looked up, Emma was staring at me with an expression that was part embarrassment, part defiance, like she couldn't believe she'd said the words out loud, but wasn't entirely sorry about it either. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I don't know why I said that. You don't need to hear about it makes perfect sense, I said, and meant it. Missing the comfort without missing the person. That's not crazy at all. We stood there in her hallway, surrounded by the gentle hum of a temporarily functional heating system, and something shifted in the air between us. Not romance exactly. It was too soon and too complicated for that, but understanding. Recognition, maybe. Like we'd both been carrying around the same kind of loneliness and just realized we weren't the only ones. I should go, I said finally, shouldering my toolbox. But if that furnace gives you any more trouble, you call me, okay? Day or night? Emma walked me to the door, and as I stepped out onto the porch, she said, Levi, thank you, not just for the heater. I drove home through the darkening streets of Cedar Falls, thinking about auburn hair and storm cloud eyes, about old houses that needed more care than their owners could afford, and about the difference between missing someone and missing the feeling of not being alone. 8. The radio played some country, a song about heartbreak and healing, and for the first time in months, I didn't change the station. 3 days passed before Emma called again, but it wasn't about the heater. This time, it was the kitchen faucet, dripping steadily enough to drive a person insane in wastewater she couldn't afford to lose. I tried tightening everything I could reach, she said over the phone, sounding frustrated, but I think I might have made it worse. When I arrived at the blue house on Maple Street, I found Emma in the kitchen, surrounded by an impressive collection of mismatched tools that looked like they'd been borrowed from several different neighbors. A wrench lay abandoned on the counter, next to what appeared to be the remains of the faucet handle. Let me guess, I said, surveying the damage. YouTube University? Emma laughed, a sound that was part embarrassment, part genuine amusement. Guilty as charged. There was this very confident man in a plaid shirt who made it look so easy. The faucet was old but salvageable, though Emma's well-intentioned repairs had definitely complicated things. As I worked, she busied herself making lunch, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup from a can. The smell filled the kitchen, mixing with the afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that were older than both of us combined. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You don't have to feed me, I said, though my stomach disagreed with the sentiment. The least I can do. Besides, I made too much. She glanced over at me, then added quietly, I'm not used to cooking for one person yet. The admission hung between us as I focused on the stubborn valve assembly. Emma had been married, that much was clear from her earlier comment about her ex-husband handling repairs, but there was something in the way she talked about being alone that suggested the separation was recent, maybe even still raw. How long, I asked, then immediately regretted the question. It wasn't my business, and I barely knew this woman. But Emma didn't seem offended. 6 months since he moved out. The divorce was finalized last month. She stirred the soup with more attention than it required. 13 years of marriage, and it ended with him taking the good screwdriver set and leaving me with a house I can't afford to maintain? That's rough. The funny thing is, I'm not even angry anymore. Sad, maybe, disappointed, but mostly just, she paused, searching for the right word. Tired. Tired of feeling like I failed at something I thought I was good at. I finished with the faucet and tested it. No more drip, steady water pressure, handle turning smoothly. Emma handed me a towel to dry my hands, and our fingers brushed. Again, just like they had 3 days earlier. This time neither of us pretended it didn't happen. Lunch is ready, she said, and we sat at her small kitchen table, eating grilled cheese sandwiches that were perfectly golden and soup that tasted like childhood comfort. So what about you? Emma asked between bites. Ever been married? Once. Didn't take it. I kept my answer short, hoping she wouldn't press. But Emma had the kind of intuition that comes from being hurt. She could recognize the edges of someone else's wounds. How long ago? 5 years? She wanted to move to Chicago and start fresh. I wanted to stay here and take care of my dad. I shrugged, trying to make it sound simple. Turns out you can't compromise on geography. Do you regret it? Staying. I thought about Sarah, blonde hair, big dreams, and the kind of restless energy that made Cedar Falls feel like a prison. She'd been right about a lot of things. Town was small, opportunities were limited, and my dad's business was never going to make either of us rich. Some days I admitted, but my dad died 2 years ago, and if I hadn't been here, I don't know. Maybe some things matter more than career advancement. Emma nodded slowly. My ex used to say I lacked ambition, that I was too content with ordinary life. She gestured around the kitchen. He wasn't wrong. I like this house, this town. I like my job at the library, even though it doesn't pay much. I like reading books and tending to plants and making soup on cold days. Is that so terrible? Sounds pretty good to me. We finished lunch in comfortable silence, and as I packed up my tools, Emma walked me to the door. The afternoon had turned overcast, promising snow before evening. Levi, she said as I stepped onto the porch. Would you like to come back for dinner sometime? I mean, a proper dinner, not just payment for fixing something. The question caught me off guard. Not because it was unwelcome, but because it had been so long since someone had asked. I'd like that.
Tomorrow night around 7.
I'll be here. That evening, I found myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror longer than usual, trying to decide if I needed a haircut and wondering when I'd stopped caring about things like that. The face looking back at me was weathered, but not old. 33 years of Iowa winters and outdoor work had left their mark, but my dad's genes had been kind. Still had most of my hair, most of my teeth, and enough muscle definition to suggest I didn't spend all my time sitting in trucks. The next day dragged by with unusual slowness. I fixed Mrs. Patterson's garbage disposal, replaced a water heater for the Hendersons, spent 3 hours troubleshooting an electrical problem that turned out to be a loose wire connection. Every job felt like an obstacle between me and 7. Oh, clocked when I finally knocked on Emma's door. She answered wearing a dress the first time I'd seen her in anything other than sweaters and jeans. It was simple, dark green, and it made her eyes look more green than gray. She'd done something different with her hair, too, pulled it back in a way that showed off the curve of her neck. "You look nice," I said, then immediately felt stupid for stating the obvious. "Thank you. Come in, dinner's almost ready." The house smelled like garlic and herbs, and she'd set the table with actual cloth napkins and candles. Not fancy candles, the kind you buy at the grocery store, but the gesture was what mattered. "I hope you like chicken," Emma said, leading me into the kitchen. I tried to remember if you mentioned any food allergies, but then I realized we've mostly talked about heating systems and failed marriages. The chicken was perfect, seasoned with rosemary and lemon, served alongside roasted vegetables and mashed potatoes that had actual butter in them. We talked about books, movies, the peculiar politics of small-town life. Emma was funny in a quiet way, the kind of humor that crept up on you rather than demanding attention. After dinner, we moved to the living room where she'd built a fire in the old stone fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the whole scene felt like something from a movie, the kind where two people fall in love slowly, without realizing it's happening. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said, curled up on the opposite end of the couch, wine glass in hand. "Shoot. When you were married, were you happy? Really happy? Not just going through the motions?" I considered the question carefully. For a while, yeah. Sarah was ... intense. Everything was urgent with her, important, life-changing. It was exciting at first, but after a while I realized she was in love with the idea of being somewhere else, someone else. I was just the person, standing between her and her real life. I took a sip of wine. "What about you and your ex?" Emma stared into the fire for a long moment. "I think we were happy in the beginning. Somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other. I saw someone holding him back, and I saw someone who couldn't appreciate what we had." She turned to look at me. "You think it's possible to be lonely in a marriage?" "I know it is." "Then you understand why I said what I said the other day, about missing being held but not missing him." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and Emma shifted slightly on the couch. Not closer exactly, but not farther away either. "I understand," I said, and meant it. We sat there as the fire burned lower, talking about everything and nothing. And I found myself thinking that this quiet evening, with good food and easy conversation, was exactly the kind of ordinary happiness Emma's ex-husband had dismissed as lack of ambition. When I finally left, close to midnight, Emma walked me to the door again. This time, when she said thank you, she reached out and briefly touched my arm. It was just a moment, skin against fabric, but I felt it all the way home. The call came at 6 a.m. on a Saturday in early March, jolting me awake from the deepest sleep I'd had in weeks. "Levi." Emma's voice was tight with panic. "I'm so sorry to wake you, but there's water everywhere. The basement is flooding, and I don't know what to do." I was dressed and in my truck within 10 minutes, tools rattling in the back as I navigated the empty streets. Spring in Iowa meant unpredictable weather. Warm days followed by sudden freezes that could wreak havoc on old plumbing systems. Emma's house, with its original 1920s pipes, was particularly vulnerable. When I arrived, Emma was standing in her driveway wearing rubber boots, pajama pants, and a winter coat thrown over what looked like a nightgown. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she had the wild-eyed look of someone who'd been fighting a losing battle with household disasters. "It started about an hour ago," she said, leading me around to the basement entrance. "It's just a trickle at first, but then ... She gestured helplessly at the concrete steps, which were disappearing under several inches of murky water. The basement was a disaster. The old water heater had finally given up, rupturing along a seam that had probably been weakening for years. Water covered most of the floor, soaking into boxes of stored belongings, and creating a lake around the base of the furnace I'd repaired just weeks earlier. "Good news is the furnace is on a platform," I said, wading through the mess to shut off the main water line. "Bad news is pretty much everything else." Emma stood at the top of the stairs, watching me work. "How bad is it? What are heaters done?" "For obviously, we'll need to pump out this water and see what can be salvaged." I looked around at the soggy cardboard boxes and waterlogged furniture. You got somewhere you can stay for a few days? Emma paused, and I could see her mentally cycling through options. Mrs. Chen offered her couch, but I hate to impose. What about family? My parents are in Arizona, and my sister lives in Minneapolis. With 3 kids under 5, I'd rather sleep in my car than add to that chaos. I finished shutting off the water and climbed back up the stairs, my boots squelching with each step. Emma looked exhausted and overwhelmed, the kind of tired that comes from dealing with one crisis too many. You can stay at my place, I heard myself say. I've got a spare room, and it's better than a couch. The offer surprised both of us. We'd been seeing each other regularly for the past month. Dinners, coffee, a movie at the old theater downtown, but we'd maintained a careful distance. No overnight stays, no assumptions about where things were heading. Now here I was, inviting her into my space during what was clearly a vulnerable moment. I couldn't, Emma said automatically. Why not? It's practical. I've got the tools and equipment to deal with this mess. You need a place to stay, and I promise I'm not a serial killer. Emma laughed despite everything. The serial killer thing is reassuring, but nothing. Let's get you some clothes and whatever else you need, then we'll figure out the rest. 2 hours later, Emma was sitting at my kitchen table, wrapped in one of my flannel shirts and nursing a cup of coffee while I made breakfast. Her own clothes were in my washing machine, along with what we'd managed to salvage from the basement before the water damage got worse. My house was smaller than Emma's, a 1960s ranch that my dad had bought when he first started the business. I'd updated the kitchen and bathroom over the years, but it still had the basic functional feel of a place where a man lived alone. Emma looked around with curious eyes, taking in the mismatched furniture and the complete absence of decorative touches. It's very ... practical, she said diplomatically. It's one word for it. I set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of her. Sarah used to say it looked like a motel room. Sarah had strong opinions about interior design. Sarah had strong opinions about everything. I sat down across from her with my own plate. She spent our last year together collecting magazines full of houses we couldn't afford, planning renovations for a life we were never going to have. Emma took a bite of eggs, chewing thoughtfully. Do you miss her? The question caught me off guard, partly because we'd talked around the subject of our exes, but never addressed it directly, partly because I'd been asking myself the same thing lately. I miss having someone to come home to, I said finally. I miss having plans that involve another person. But Sarah specifically? No, I don't think I do. That's honest. What about you? You miss being married? Emma considered this while she buttered her toast. I miss the illusion of security. The feeling that someone else was sharing the weight of adult responsibilities. But actual marriage, with all its complications and compromises and small daily disappointments, I don't miss that at all. After breakfast, we drove back to her house to assess the damage in daylight. The basement was still flooded, but the water level had stabilized now that the main line was shut off. We spent the morning hauling out damaged items and setting up pumps to remove the standing water. Emma worked without complaint, even though I could tell the loss of her stored belongings, photo albums, holiday decorations, boxes of books, was hitting her hard. When she found a waterlogged scrapbook from her college years, she sat on the basement steps for a long moment, just staring at the ruined pages. My roommate made this for me, she said quietly. Senior year. It's got pictures. From our spring break trip, graduation, all kinds of memories. I wanted to tell her that photos could be dried and sometimes saved, that memories didn't live in scrapbooks anyway. But sometimes the right thing to do is just acknowledge that loss is loss, even when it's not life-changing. That sucks, I said, and meant it. By afternoon, we'd made significant progress. The water was mostly gone, the damaged items were sorted into keep, toss, and maybe salvageable piles. I'd installed a temporary water heater that would keep Emma's house functional while we figured out permanent solutions. I should probably go to Mrs. Chen's tonight, Emma said, as we stood in her kitchen, both of us filthy and exhausted. You've done enough. The offer still stands, I said. Spare room, clean sheets, and I make decent pancakes. Emma looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing options that had nothing to do with sleeping arrangements and everything to do with the space we'd been carefully maintaining between us. "Okay," she said finally, "but I'm cooking dinner." That evening, Emma stood in my kitchen wearing jeans and a sweater she'd retrieved from her upstairs closet, chopping vegetables for a stir-fry while I cleaned up the last of the basement equipment. It was domestic in a way that felt both natural and significant, the kind of ordinary evening that could easily become a habit if we let it. "Levi," Emma said as we sat down to eat, "thank you, not just for today, but for I don't know. Being someone I can call at 6 in the morning, anytime." After dinner, we settled on the couch to watch a movie, Emma curled up on one end while I claimed the other. But as the evening wore on, the careful distance we'd been maintaining seemed less important than the simple comfort of not being alone. When Emma's head found its way to my shoulder somewhere around the second act, I didn't move away. Later, when I walked her to the spare room, she paused at the doorway. "This feels like a bigger step than it probably should," she said. "Everything feels bigger when you're starting over." Emma rose up on her toes and kissed my cheek, a brief press of lips that somehow managed to be both innocent and loaded with possibility. "Good night, Levi." "Good night, Emma." Lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the quiet sounds of another person in my house, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of sheets, the soft rhythm of breathing from the room across the hall. It had been 5 years since I'd fallen asleep knowing someone else was there. I'd forgotten how much difference it made. Emma stayed for 3 days, and by the time she moved back to her own house, something fundamental had shifted between us. It wasn't just the shared morning coffee or the way she'd rearranged my spice cabinet with alphabetical precision. It was the quiet moments reading books in the same room, comfortable silence while doing dishes, the way she'd started, saying "we" when talking about plans for the weekend. The insurance adjuster came on a Thursday, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else than a flood-damaged basement in Cedar Falls. He spent an hour poking around with a clipboard, asking questions about the age of the water heater and whether Emma had maintained it properly. "The unit was installed in 1998, he said, making notes. "It's well beyond its expected lifespan. I'm afraid coverage is going to be limited." Emma and I exchanged glances. We'd both suspected this was coming. "What does that mean exactly?" Emma asked. "We'll cover the water removal and some of the structural damage. The water heater replacement and most of the personal property losses fall under normal wear and depreciation." He handed Emma a form. "You'll receive a check for approximately $1,200. After he left, Emma sat at her kitchen table, staring at the paperwork like it might spontaneously combust. $1,200, she said quietly. "Water heater alone will cost more than that." I'd already been running numbers in my head. A decent replacement unit, properly installed, would run close to $2,000. Add in the flooring that needed replacement, the drywall that had to be torn out and redone, and the cost of properly waterproofing the basement, and we were looking at $6,000 or $7,000 Emma didn't have. "We'll figure it out," I said, though I wasn't sure how, that weekend. I drove to Des Moines to visit a supplier who owed me a favor from years back. Tommy Reeves had started his plumbing business around the same time I'd taken over from my dad, and we'd helped each other through more than one tight spot over the years. "Water heater, huh?" Tommy said, scrolling through his inventory on a tablet, covered in fingerprints and coffee stains. "I've got a unit that came back from a job. Customers decided they wanted a different model after we'd already delivered it. Can't sell it as new, but there's nothing wrong with it." "How much for you? $600? "That's the cost plus labor to get it here." I shook his hand. "Deal." The real challenge was Emma's pride. When I showed up Monday morning with the water heater in my truck, she met me at the door with her arms crossed in a stubborn expression I was beginning to recognize. "How much did that cost?" she asked, before I'd even gotten out of the vehicle. "Don't worry about it. Levi Morrison, don't you dare. Don't worry about it, me. I'm not a charity case. Nobody said you were." "Then why won't you tell me how much it cost?" I sighed and leaned against the truck. "Because you'll insist on paying me, and we both know you can't afford it right now." and you'll make yourself crazy trying to figure out how to come up with money you don't have for something that needs to be done regardless. Emma's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. That's annoyingly logical. I have my moments, fine, but I'm keeping track of everything, and when I get back on my feet financially, I'm paying you back every cent. Whatever makes you feel better. Installing the new water heater took most of the day, partly because the old connections needed updating, and partly because Emma insisted on helping with everything. Even though her idea of helping mostly involved handing me tools I hadn't asked for and providing running commentary on my work methods. Is it supposed to make that noise? She asked. When I fired up the unit for the first time, what noise? That ... gurgling sound. I listened for a moment. That's just air working its way through the system. Perfectly normal. Are you sure? Because the last water heater made noises right before it exploded all over my basement. It didn't explode. It ruptured. And this one isn't going to do either of those things. By evening, Emma had hot water again. We celebrated with takeout Chinese food eaten straight from the containers while sitting on her living room floor. The basement still needed work, but the crisis phase was over. I owe you more than money, Emma said, picking at her lo mein with plastic chopsticks. You don't owe me anything. I owe you a lot. Time, energy, stress, sleep. She set down her food and looked at me seriously. Why are you doing all this? The question hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us had been ready to address directly. I could have deflected, made a joke, changed the subject. Instead, I found myself telling the truth. Because when I'm helping you, I feel useful in a way I haven't felt in years. Because you make me coffee the way I actually like it, instead of the way you think I should like it. Because you laugh at my terrible jokes and you don't try to fix me, or improve me, or make me into someone else. I paused, surprised by my own honesty. And because when you said you missed being held, I realized I missed holding someone. Emma set down her chopsticks and moved closer. Close enough that I could smell her shampoo and see the small scar above her left eyebrow that I'd been wondering about for weeks. Levi? Yeah? Would you hold me now? I didn't answer with words. Instead, I pulled her closer, and she settled against my chest with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. We stayed like that for a long time, Emma's head on my shoulder, my arms around her, the quiet house settling into evening around us. This is what I missed, Emma whispered. Not the big romantic gestures or the fancy dates, just this. Being close to someone who chooses to be here. I pressed my lips to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. I'm here, I know. That's what scares me. I pulled back enough to look at her. Scares you how? 'Cause I'm starting to need you. And I swore I wouldn't need anyone again. Emma's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I was married for 13 years to someone who made me feel like needing him was a weakness, like being dependent was the same as being pathetic. Someone isn't the same as being dependent on them, isn't it? No, dependence is when you can't function without someone. Need is when you function better with them. I touched her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. You were handling everything fine before I came along? The house, the repairs, the life decisions? You don't need me to survive, but maybe we need each other to be happy. Emma leaned into my touch. When did you get so wise about relationships? When? I met someone worth figuring it out for. This time, when Emma kissed me, it wasn't on the cheek. It was soft and tentative at first, then deeper as I responded. Weeks of careful distance finally giving way to the connection we'd both been circling. Around when we broke apart, we were both breathing harder. I should probably go home, I said, though I made no move to leave. You should, Emma agreed, but her hands were still tangled in my shirt. My truck's right outside. Easy drive. 5 minutes tops. Very convenient. We looked at each other, both of us knowing this was a moment that would change things. That once we crossed this line, there would be no going back to careful distance and separate bedrooms. Stay, Emma said quietly. Not in the spare room. Stay with me. Searched her face for uncertainty, for any sign that she was acting out. Of gratitude or loneliness, rather than genuine desire. What I found instead was the same mixture of want and fear that I was feeling myself. Are you sure? I'm sure I don't want to be alone tonight. I'm sure I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in years. I'm sure that if we don't try this, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what if. Emma's smile was soft but determined. That's as sure as I know how to be. I kissed her again, longer this time, and when we finally made our way upstairs to her bedroom, it felt less like a beginning and more like coming home. I woke up in Emma's bed to the sound of rain against old windows and the unfamiliar but welcome sensation of another person's warmth beside me. Emma was still asleep, curled on her side facing away from me, auburn hair spread across the pillow like spilled copper. The morning light filtering through her curtains was soft and gray, the kind that made everything look like a watercolor painting. For a moment, I just lay there, taking inventory. Emma's breathing was deep and even. The house was quiet except for the rain and the occasional creak of old wood settling. My clothes from the night before were scattered across the floor, mixed with Emma's in a way that seemed both intimate and natural. The last time I'd woken up next to someone, it had been Sarah, and even toward the end. There had always been this undercurrent of tension, like we were both waiting for the other shoe to drop. This felt different. Peaceful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Emma stirred as I was trying to decide whether to get up and make coffee or stay and risk waking her. She rolled over, eyes still closed, and reached out until her hand found my chest. "Morning," she mumbled against my shoulder. "Morning. How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in months." She opened her eyes, blinking in the dim light.
"You same?"
We lay there for a while, not talking, just existing in the quiet bubble of early morning before the world demanded our attention. Emma traced lazy patterns on my chest with her fingertip, and I found myself thinking that this simple intimacy was what I'd missed most about being with someone. "I should probably get up and make coffee," Emma said eventually, though she made no move to leave the bed. "Probably. And you'd probably have work to do." "Probably, but I don't want to move." "Me neither." The spell was broken by the insistent buzzing of my phone on the nightstand. I reached for it reluctantly, squinting at the screen to see Mrs. Henderson's name. "I should take this," I said apologetically. "Mrs. Henderson only calls for genuine emergencies." Emma nodded and stretched, the movement causing the sheet to slip in interesting ways that made concentrating on the phone call more difficult than it should have been. "Levi. Thank goodness." Mrs. Henderson's voice was tight with worry. "Our furnace has completely stopped working, and Harold thinks he smells gas. We're standing outside in our robes like refugees." I was already reaching for my pants. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't go back inside until I get there, okay?" After I hung up, Emma was sitting up in bed, sheet pulled around herself, watching me get dressed with an expression I couldn't. "Quite red emergency?" she asked. "Gas leak, possibly. The Hendersons are in their 70s and they're standing outside in the rain." I paused, one leg in my jeans. "I'm sorry. This isn't how I wanted this morning to go." "It's exactly how this morning should go," Emma said firmly. "It's who you are. You help people." I finished getting dressed and kissed her goodbye, a quick press of lips that somehow managed to be both casual and loaded with promise. "Dinner tonight?" I asked.
"I'll cook."
The Hendersons' furnace problem turned out to be serious but not catastrophic. A cracked heat exchanger that was indeed leaking gas. I spent the morning making it safe and explaining to Harold why his attempt to fix it with duct tape had been both dangerous and ineffective. By the time I finished, it was past noon, and I had 3 other calls waiting. Spring in Iowa meant everyone's heating systems were acting up as they tried to decide whether it was time to shut down for the season or keep fighting the unpredictable weather. I was knee-deep in replacing a blower motor for the Carlsons when my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "How do you feel about pot roast?" I typed back, positively. "Good. I'm making enough for an army." The simple exchange made me smile in a way that probably looked ridiculous to anyone watching a grown man grin at his phone while covered in furnace dust. The afternoon flew by in a blur of routine repairs and maintenance calls. It was the kind of work I could do in my sleep, which left my mind free to wander back to the morning, to the feeling of waking up beside Emma, to the way she'd looked sitting in bed, with her hair messed up and her eyes still soft with sleep. By the time I knocked, On Emma's door, that evening, I was tired, hungry, and looking forward to the kind of ordinary domestic evening I'd been craving without realizing it. Emma answered wearing jeans and a sweater, hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking like she'd spent the day doing normal Saturday things instead of navigating the emotional aftermath of a night that had changed everything between us. "You look like you've been wrestling with machinery all day," she said, stepping aside to let me in, because I have been. Harold Henderson decided to help his furnace along with electrical tape and prayer. Please tell me he didn't electrocute himself, just his furnace, but he's fine, and they'll have heat again by tomorrow. The house smelled incredible, pot roast and vegetables and something baking that might have been bread. Emma had spent the day cooking, really cooking. It's the kind of meal that takes hours and fills every corner of a house with warmth. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," I said, following her into the kitchen. I wanted to. Besides, I had nervous energy to burn off. Nervous about what? Emma paused in the middle of checking something in the oven. About whether last night was going to make things weird between us. About whether you'd regret it in the daylight. About whether I'd turned into one of those women who sleeps with a guy once and immediately starts planning the wedding. I stepped behind her and put my hands on her shoulders, feeling the tension there. "Are you planning our wedding?" "Not yet. I'm still deciding on color schemes." I laughed and turned her around to face me. "For the record, I don't regret anything about last night. And the only thing weird is how normal this feels." Emma relaxed. "Against me, it does feel normal, doesn't it? Like we've been doing this for years instead of months." Over dinner, we talked about our days. It's about the Hendersons' furnace crisis, and the book Emma was reading, and whether we thought spring was actually going to arrive, or if Iowa was stuck in permanent winter mode. It was the kind of conversation married couples have, comfortable and meandering and full of the small details that make up a life. After dinner, we settled on the couch to watch a movie, but neither of us was really paying attention to the screen. Instead, we talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories. Embarrassing moments, the kind of random thoughts that only make sense when shared with someone who already knows your quirks. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said during a particularly boring scene involving explosions. "Always. What do you want?" "Long term, I mean, from life, from relationships, from all of it." It was the kind of question that would have sent me running a year ago. But sitting there, with Emma curled against my side, her hand resting on my chest, it didn't feel scary. It felt like a conversation worth having. "I want what we have right now," I said slowly. "I want someone to come home to who's genuinely happy. To see me, I want quiet Sunday mornings and shared dinners and someone who doesn't try to change me into a different person." I paused, thinking. I want to build something real with someone who thinks what we're building is worth the effort. Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Oh, that sounds like you're talking about forever." "Maybe I am. That's terrifying." "Yeah, it is." She tilted her head up to look at me. "But good terrifying or bad terrifying? The best kind of terrifying." Emma smiled and settled back against my chest. "Good, because I think I might be falling in love with you, and that's the most terrifying thing I've done in years." The words hung in the air between us, honest and vulnerable, and exactly right. I pressed my lips to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and thinking that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as broken water heaters and emergency repair calls. "I'm already there," I said quietly. "Have been for weeks." Outside, the rain continued to fall against the windows, but inside Emma's house, everything was warm and safe and exactly where it needed to be. I didn't hear from Emma for 4 days. 4 days of checking my phone every 10 minutes, of driving past her house on the way to jobs that didn't require me to go anywhere near Maple Street, of starting to text her and then deleting the messages before sending them. 4 days of wondering if David's psychological warfare had worked better than he'd probably hoped. On Thursday evening, I was replacing a garbage disposal for the Kowalskis when Mrs. Kowalski cornered me in her kitchen. "You look like someone stole your favorite wrench," she said, handing me a glass of sweet tea I hadn't asked for. "Just tired." "Huh. This wouldn't have anything to do with that pretty librarian, would it?" Emma Walsh. Cedar Falls was a small town. Of course, people had noticed. We're just ... I paused, realizing I didn't actually know what we were anymore. It's complicated. Honey, everything worth having is complicated. The question is whether it's worth fighting for. Mrs. Kowalski was 82 and had been married to the same man for 60 years. If anyone knew about fighting for relationships, it was probably her. What if fighting for it means letting someone make a mistake? Kind of mistake? I found myself telling her about Emma's house, about the money, about David's visit and the questions it had raised. Mrs. Kowalski listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. So this ex-husband thinks Emma should sell her house and start over somewhere cheaper, she said when I finished. Yeah, and you think he might be right about the money part? I think Emma's drowning, and I don't know if helping her stay afloat is actually helping or just postponing the inevitable. Mrs. Kowalski was quiet for a moment, sipping her tea and studying my face. Can I tell you something about houses, Levi? Sure. This house we're sitting in. We bought it in 1962 for $8,000. At the time, everyone said we were crazy. Too big, too old, too expensive for a young couple just starting out. My mother-in-law spent 6 months trying to talk us out of it, but you kept it. We kept it. Do you know why? I shook my head because it wasn't just a house, it was home. It was where we planned to raise our children, where we wanted to grow old together, where we could see ourselves being happy. She gestured around the kitchen. Was it a stretch financially? Did we eat mac and cheese for dinner more nights than I care to remember? You bet. But we made it work because we wanted it to work. That's different, though. You and your husband were making the decision together, were we? Because I remember plenty of nights when one of us wanted to give up and the other one had to do the convincing. Marriage isn't about making every decision together, honey. It's about taking turns being the strong one when the other person needs to lean. Friday morning, I got a call from Emma. Not a text, an actual phone call. Can you come over? She asked. Her voice sounded steady, but tired. I need to show you something. Was there in 15 minutes. Emma met me at the door wearing jeans and a paint-stained t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked like she'd been working on something that required getting dirty. I've been thinking, she said without preamble, about what David said, about the money, about all of it. She led me into the living room, where she'd spread papers. Across every available surface, bank statements, repair invoices, budget spreadsheets, and what looked like real estate listings. I made a list, Emma said, picking up a yellow legal pad covered in her neat handwriting. Every repair this house has needed in the past 2 years, what it cost, what it would cost if I'd hired someone other than you. I looked at the numbers. She'd written down, even with the discounts I'd given her, the total was staggering. Emma, let me finish. Then I made another list. Every repair it's likely to need in the next 5 years. New roof, new windows, foundation work, electrical updates. She handed me the pad. The total is more than I make in a year. The number at the bottom of the page made my stomach drop. She was right. It was unsustainable. So David was right, I said. About the money, yes. But he was wrong about everything else. Emma moved to stand in front of me. He was wrong about you, and he was wrong about what this house means to me, and he was wrong about what kind of future I want to build. I don't understand. I called the bank yesterday. I asked about refinancing, about loan modification options, about everything I could think of. Emma's voice was getting stronger, more determined. They can't help me. The house is already mortgaged for more than it's worth, and my income isn't enough to qualify for additional loans. So you're going to sell? No. I'm going to fight for it. Emma walked over to her laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a website for something called Historic Home Restoration Grants. I spent the last 4 days researching. This house was built in 1924, which makes it eligible for historic preservation funding. The state has programs for low-income homeowners who want to restore properties that contribute to community character. I stared at the screen. How much funding? Up to $50,000 over 5 years, as long as I agree to maintain the historic integrity of the property and stay here for at least 10 years after the restoration is complete. Emma, that's I paused, reading the requirements. This is a lot of paperwork, a lot of inspections and approvals and bureaucratic hoops. I know. I also know I'll need help with the actual restoration work. Professional help from someone who understands old houses and knows how to work with historical preservation requirements. She was looking at me expectantly, and I realized what she was asking. You want me to be your contractor? I want you to be my partner? In this project, in this house, in whatever comes next. Emma's voice softened. I don't need you to save me, Levi. I need you to help me save myself. I looked around the living room, seeing it with new eyes. The crown molding that would need careful restoration, the hardwood floors that could be refinished to their original beauty, the built-in bookcases that just needed some love and attention. This could work, I said slowly. If we do most of the labor ourselves, if we're careful about materials, if we prioritize the essential repairs first, ... Is that a yes? I pulled Emma into my arms, feeling like we'd found our way back to solid ground after days of uncertainty. That's a yes to the restoration project. But I need to know, are we okay? After what David said, after the questions about money and motives, Emma leaned back to look at me. David spent 13 years trying to convince me that I wasn't smart enough to make my own decisions, that I needed someone else to tell me what I could and couldn't handle. I'm not going to let him do that to me again, even from a distance. And us? We're better than okay. We're going to restore a beautiful old house together. We're going to prove that sometimes the best things in life are worth fighting for. I kissed her then, long and deep, tasting hope and determination and the promise of a future built on something stronger than convenience or financial desperation. When we broke apart, Emma grinned at me. So, partner, when do we start? I looked at the grant application on her laptop, at the spreadsheets full of repair costs, at the woman who decided to fight for what she wanted instead of settling for what seemed practical. We start now. 2 years later, I was installing the last piece of restored crown molding in Emma's dining room when she called from the kitchen. Levi, you need to see this. The tone of her voice made me set down my tools immediately. In the kitchen, Emma was standing at the counter, holding an official-looking envelope with the state seal. The final inspection results? I asked. She nodded, hands shaking slightly as she opened the envelope. We'd been waiting 3 weeks for the Historic Preservation Committee's final approval. The last step in a process that had taken 18 months of careful restoration work. Emma read silently for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. We passed. Full approval for the Historic Registry. The house is officially recognized as a contributing property to the Cedar Falls Historic District. I whooped and picked her up, spinning her around the kitchen we'd restored with our own hands, the cabinets we'd stripped and refinished, the countertops we'd carefully selected to match the period, the vintage light fixtures we'd hunted down at antique stores across 3 counties. We did it, Emma laughed, wrapping her arms around my neck. We actually did it. Transformation had been incredible. What started as a house Emma could barely afford to maintain had become a showcase of 1920s architecture. The grant money, combined with our sweat equity and careful budgeting, had allowed us to restore nearly every original detail while upgrading the essential systems to modern standards. The new electrical work was hidden behind period-appropriate fixtures. The updated plumbing ran through walls we'd carefully opened and closed. The HVAC system was state-of-the-art, but designed to work with the original ductwork we'd painstakingly cleaned and sealed. More importantly, the house was now energy efficient enough that Emma's utility bills had dropped by 60%. The restored windows and proper insulation meant the heating system didn't have to work nearly as hard, and the new water heater was sized appropriately for the space. Mrs. Chen is going to be so proud, Emma said, settling back onto her feet. She's been telling everyone in the neighborhood about our project. Mrs. Chen had become our unofficial project supervisor, stopping by weekly to check on our progress and offer opinions on paint colors. She'd also brought us more casseroles than 2 people could reasonably eat, especially during the 3-month period when we'd had to shut off the kitchen water while replacing the pipes. Speaking of Mrs. Chen, I said, she mentioned something interesting yesterday. What kind of interesting thing? The Hendersons are thinking about selling. Apparently Harold wants to move to one of those senior communities in Florida. Emma raised an eyebrow. And
Ow.
Mrs. Chen thinks we should consider buying it. Fix it up like we did in this place. The idea had been percolating in my mind for weeks. The Henderson house was a 1930s colonial that had good bones but needed extensive work. With our experience and the network of craftspeople we developed during Emma's restoration, we could probably turn it around in a year. Are you suggesting we go into business together? Emma asked. I'm suggesting we think about it. Historic. Restoration is a niche market, but there's demand for it, and we're good at it. It was true. Over the past 2 years, we'd become a team in ways I'd never experienced before. Emma had an eye for period details and a talent for research that had saved us thousands of dollars in architectural consulting fees. I brought the technical skills and contractor connections. Together, we developed a system that worked. And Walsh Restoration, Emma mused, has a nice ring to it. Emma walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where we'd restored the original garden. Layout based on a 1920s photograph we'd found in the city archives. The space was different now, purposeful and beautiful instead of overgrown and chaotic. What about us, she asked. The personal us, I mean. It's working together, living together, building a business together. That's a lot of together. It was a fair question. We'd been officially living together for 8 months, though practically speaking, I'd been staying at Emma's house more nights than my own for most of the past 2 years. My lease was up for renewal next month, and we'd been dancing around. The conversation about making it official, I think we've already proven we can handle a lot together, I said, moving to stand behind her at the window. But if you need more space, I don't need more space. I need to know we're building something that will last. Emma leaned back against my chest. I need to know that if the business fails or the next house is a disaster or we have a fight about paint colors, we'll still choose each other. I turned her around to face me. Emma Walsh, I've spent 2 years watching you research historic paint formulations and argue with building inspectors and refinish hardwood floors on your hands and knees. I have seen you covered in sawdust and plaster dust and paint of every color imaginable. I have watched you cry over ruined wallpaper and cheer over perfectly restored doorknobs. And I have never been more sure of anything in my life than I am of us. Emma smiled, the kind of smile that started small and grew until it took over her whole face. Is that your way of saying you love me? That's my way of saying I want to marry you? The words hung in the air between us, surprising. Both of us. I hadn't planned to propose in the kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon while covered in sawdust. But somehow it felt exactly right. Are you serious? Emma asked, completely serious. I want to restore houses with you and fight about design choices and grow old in buildings we've saved together. I took her hands. I want to wake up every morning knowing that we chose this. Life, this partnership, this kind of happiness. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. I don't have a ring, I said. I don't need a ring. I need to know what you mean. I mean it. Then yes. Obviously yes. I kissed her in the kitchen we'd rebuilt together, surrounded by the evidence of what 2 people could accomplish when they decided to fight for something worth having. Outside, Cedar Falls continued its quiet existence, full of old houses and the people who loved them despite their complications. 6 months later, we were married in Emma's backyard under the apple tree we'd pruned back to health. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire ceremony. Mrs. Kowalski made the cake. Harold Henderson gave Emma away because her father couldn't make the trip from Arizona. David didn't attend, though he did send a wedding gift, a small cactus with a note that said, "For your new life in the desert." Emma laughed when she read. It implanted the cactus in a pot on our kitchen windowsill, where it thrived despite our non-desert climate. The Henderson house became our first official restoration. Project is Morrison and Walsh Historic Restoration. We bought it for a song, spent 8 months bringing it back to its 1930s glory, and sold it to a young family from Chicago who fell in love with the built-in breakfast nook and the original tile work in the bathroom. 3 years after that first Morning when Emma's furnace was grinding and she was wearing every piece of clothing she owned. We were sitting on our front porch, the same porch I'd stood on that first day, toolbox in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and orange. Emma was reading a book about Victorian architecture. Research for our latest project. I was sketching out plans for updating the electrical system in an 1890s farmhouse without damaging the original plaster walls. Do you ever miss the simplicity? Emma asked, looking up from her book. When your biggest relationship decision was whether to answer service calls after 8 p.m., do you miss when your biggest house problem was a broken faucet? Not for a second. And no, I don't miss the simplicity. Emma set down her book and moved closer on the porch swing we'd restored from a salvage yard. I've been thinking about something you said that first night, about missing being held. Yeah, I realized something. I wasn't just missing physical affection. I was missing being known by someone who chose to stay anyway. Being held by someone who saw all my complications and decided they were worth it. I put my arm around her, pulling her close enough that I could smell her shampoo and feel the steady rhythm of her breathing. I know all your complications, I said. Your terrible taste in morning television, your obsession with historically accurate paint colors, the way you cry at insurance commercials. Those aren't complications. Those are personality quirks. Your inability to throw away broken things even when they can't be fixed. Your tendency to take on projects that are bigger than you can handle. Your complete faith that everything will work out if you just try hard enough. Emma was quiet for a moment. Those sound like complications. Will sound like the reasons I fell in love with you. The sun finished setting, and Cedar Falls settled into another quiet evening. Somewhere in the distance, a furnace kicked on, providing warmth to a family that probably took it for granted. Tomorrow, someone's water heater would fail, or their faucet would start dripping. And they'd need help from someone who understood that fixing things was about more than just making them work again. But tonight, Emma and I sat on our restored porch in our carefully maintained house, holding each other and planning our next project, proving every day that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as problems that need solving. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.